In 193 AD, a bloody civil war brought a new ruler to Rome, Emperor Septimius Severus. When he claimed the throne, the traditional Roman Senate had been stripped of its actual authority. Severus looked at the political landscape and recognized a harsh reality. His survival no longer depended on senatorial decrees or aristocratic approval. It depended entirely on the physical force of his legionaries. On his deathbed, Severus passed this philosophy to his sons. His advice was simple: live in harmony, enrich the soldiers, and completely disregard everyone else. That single philosophy transformed Rome from a nominal republic into a precarious military dictatorship. Buying absolute loyalty from the legions was staggeringly expensive. To fund this massive payroll, the state squeezed the civilian population with crippling tax increases. A chart shows the Roman Denarius's silver purity plummeting, while military pay rises aggressively.
To fund this, the state melted down and debased its currency. A third line appears: civilian purchasing power collapses, triggering explosive inflation that crushed citizens. This purely transactional relationship broke the actual discipline of the army. Professional soldiers mutated into mercenaries who expected constant payouts just to do their jobs. By prioritizing army pay, the Severans created an inescapable cycle of debt and dependency. The state was now held hostage by an institution that produced nothing but demanded everything. The first major crack in this system came with Emperor Elagabalus. He was a teenager whose extreme hedonism and obsession with foreign religious cults completely alienated the troops. The military exercised its ultimate veto power. They murdered Elagabalus, dragged his mutilated body through the streets, and threw it into the Tiber River. Seeking a system reset, the empire installed his 13-year-old cousin, Alexander Severus. Because of his age, the government was heavily micromanaged by his mother, Julia Mamaea. Alexander and his mother managed to foster a temporary golden age for civilians. They cut taxes, subsidized education, and handed administrative control over to experienced legal advisors. But the Praetorian Guard fiercely rejected this civilian oversight. They rioted in the streets of Rome and dragged their own prefect into the palace, murdering him right in front of the powerless emperor. A prosperous, enlightened civilian government meant absolutely nothing if the military class felt marginalized and undercompensated. This fragile golden age shattered when external threats hit both ends of the empire at once. The Sassanid Empire invaded the east, and Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine in the north. Alexander was forced to march to the German frontier, arriving here at the stone foundations of Mogontiacum, modern-day Mainz, to personally lead a battered, demoralized army. On the front lines, Alexander hesitated. His mother was terrified of him dying in combat, and her overprotective fears paralyzed his command. Rather than fighting the Germanic invaders, Alexander made a disastrous strategic decision. He attempted to buy them off with his mother's hoarded gold. To an army bred on the expectation of military supremacy, this act of diplomacy was viewed as unforgivable cowardice. Alexander had failed the only test that mattered to his soldiers. He was no longer their commander. The Roman legions were deeply disgusted. They felt humiliated by an emperor who refused to draw his sword and shed blood. The tension reached a fatal breaking point. These battle-hardened veterans simply refused to take orders from a timid teenager and his wealthy mother. In March of 235 AD, the soldiers mutinied. They stormed the command tent and slaughtered Alexander and Julia Mamaea. The armed forces had completed their takeover, violently stripping away the last remnants of dynastic civilian rule. The legions then took a step they had never taken before. They elevated Maximinus Thrax, a semi-illiterate, battle-scarred barbarian soldier from the rank and file, to the throne. By crowning one of their own, the military permanently discarded the idea that an emperor required aristocratic blood or the approval of the Senate. The immediate fallout was the crisis of the 3rd century. For the next 50 years, the empire burned through over 25 competing emperors in a cycle of civil war. When a state builds its entire foundation on appeasing the military, it is only a matter of time before the military